Welcome to Scorched Earth and a general reading for the collective on the thread of Cancer season. This is designed to be a companion reading to your monthly overviews so that you've got some sense of the context of the backdrop as the sun moves through Cancer. So I'm using the Hexen 2 for you today because I have, I think, now genuinely legitimately lost my Hexen 5. I don't know where it is. No doubt it will reappear when it's time. And before we begin, before we pull any cards out, I just want to bring your attention to some of the transits that may be happening during Cancer season. There are actually a lot of them, and I don't want to make this a whole astrology reading, so I'm not going to do that. But the first thing to know is that we will be going into a Mercury retrograde in Cancer season. Although Mercury stations retrograde on the 29th of June, as we come into Cancer season, we are in the shadow period of that anyway. So you may start to notice things of a Mercury retrograde type nature showing up. It's really not a cause for panic. Like, I want to make this really, really clear. When the planets go retrograde, all they're doing is giving a pause to their forward momentum so that we can go back and check our workings on things. So standard Mercury retrograde rules apply. You know, it's a good time to not necessarily to launch something, but to go back over things that are already in existence and make sure we've done them properly. Because this retrograde is happening in the sign of Cancer too, it's a period for deep examination of one's feelings about stuff, and possibly we might have relationships showing up as important in that consideration too. So Mercury will station at 26 degrees of Cancer, and then over the course of the next few weeks retreat all the way back to 16 degrees Cancer before stationing direct and then moving forwards again. So and it stations direct on the 23rd of July. So we'll be just into Leo season when that happens. What else? The nodes will be down to the final 1% or so of their transit of both Pisces and Virgos. So if you've been having a rough time in the Pisces and Virgo section of your chart, that should start to alleviate very, very quickly in the coming few weeks. But all their tension's going to go into the Leo Aquarius part of your chart, so just be aware of that. We're going to have Chiron entering Taurus on the 20th of June, so ever so slightly before Cancer season starts a proper, which is going to be an interesting experience, I think. I think it will, at least anyway. We'll also have Jupiter moving into Leo, and that happens on the 30th of June, and that's, although Leo's going to move out of, Jupiter will move out of its sign of exaltation, which is Cancer. He hasn't really had the opportunity to do his kind of best work in the way that he usually would in Cancer, because the whole time he's been being squared by Neptune and Saturn. So we've had a rather muted Jupiter compared to the way he would usually be. But he doesn't mind being in Leo too much. So, we might find that experience is, I don't know, it just feels a little bit more like Jupiter expressing himself as he would do naturally. What else do we have? Neptune will station retrograde at 4 degrees of Aries and start his retrograde motion, Lord of the Invisible Empire, as he is. And that kind of segues us into something really interesting that is going to emerge in Cancer season, which is an astrological configuration that has been was spotted and in fact named after the astrologer who spotted it, which was André Barau, of the Barau basket. Now, astrologers just divided as to what this actually means, whether this is going to be a good thing or not. But it's comprised of, I've got my list here, Pluto in Aquarius at 4 degrees retrograde, Neptune in Aries at 4 degrees retrograde, forward-leaning Uranus at 4 degrees of Gemini, and Jupiter at 4 degrees of Leo. Now this configuration starts mid-July, and although it has a point where it's at its exactitude and most powerful, for a short period. It's actually ongoing right into about the first week of August. Now, I pulled up a thing here that I want to read to you. And the reason why astrologers are divided is whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is because some people think that certain astrologers have romanticized the basket or framed it as a utopian turning point. But what Barau actually said was he viewed this basket formation as ushering in a reorganisation of the world and a new collective orientation. While that language can sound optimistic, he did not frame it in terms of New Age ideology, global peace, or sudden harmony. Rather, he described it as the end of a long depressive cycle and noted the possibility of shifts in power or resource distribution. He did not attach a timeline or promise outcomes, only that a structural change was underway. Now, the reason why a lot of emphasis has been put on this is because there's a train of thought to say that Barau predicted the Berlin Wall coming down when it did. So further, this says, much of the optimism surrounding Barau's theory is tied to the fact that to the symbolism of the Berlin Wall coming down. However, while in that moment it was widely celebrated, the lived experience in Germany that followed was far more complex. Reunification was not an equal merging of systems. It created clear divisions between those who had economic stability and those who did not. In East Germany, industries shut down, skills lost their value, and unemployment reached roughly 30% in some regions. The transition brought uncertainty, disruption, and long-term consequences. So I think, being a Saturn-ruled person as I am, I tend to err on the side of whatever happens during this season, it is going to mark the first distinct move towards the reorganisation of the world as we have known it. But whether our experience of that is utopian or perhaps to an extent slightly dystopian might well depend on what side of the world that you are living on at any given point. I bring it up because it is a significant configuration off the back of a number of significant transits that we've had. And you're probably going to hear people talking about this quite a lot over the coming weeks. As with everything else, we're living through history and it will be interesting to see what this brings. But it doesn't necessarily bring promise of utopia. It doesn't necessarily bring promise of dystopia either. But as with most things, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But I think whatever happens, we are going to know that normality as we have understood it does not exist any longer. So, with all of that said, let's have a look at what the cards have to say about the thread of Cancer season. So we're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So our cards are the Fool. Well, touché. We also have the Four of Wands, good lord. And we have the Ten of Swords. And there it is. I don't think I could have picked 3 more pertinent cards to cover exactly what I just said there, right? We've got an experience of the Ten of Swords, we've got an ending of something very, very uncomfortable, but we also have the creation of something new, a new foundation, as per the Four of Swords, and we have this Fool energy guiding all of it. Now, whether the Fool is a good influence or a bad influence, I guess a lot of it comes down to perspective, because a lot of tarot readers will read the Fool as a uniformly positive energy, and it is the pure potential, but it is also the pure chaos of the moment. It's like all things are possible, simultaneously existing in time and space, because the Fool is everything and nothing simultaneously. It's that point of potential. Now, whether you see it as potential or chaos depends very much on your mindset, right? But the binary, there is polarity. There's a better word. The polarity of the Fool means that like I said, all things are possible. And whilst we have the leap into the void, or the, trusting the process, trusting that we're going to topple off the cliff, but we're going to land on our feet, is balanced out by the idea that the Fool can also represent foolish endeavours, a certain naive optimism in the face of real danger. And I'm not sure that we see enough here on the table to give us an idea as to how to veer ourselves into a Four of Wands versus a Ten of Swords situation. Because if a lot of the things that we've seen coming down the pike for a long time really start to establish themselves during this period, then yes, we have the creation of a new foundation, but the Ten of Swords might be our realization of what we have lost in the creation of that. So as AI takes over everything, possibly, we have a loss of freedoms, we have a loss of privacy, we have a loss of rights, potentially. But we could also see where all the doomsayers may actually be proved wrong by this possibly leaning towards a utopic version of what the world could be, that we might see via the Four of Wands and the Fool. As I said before, the truth of it is probably somewhere in the middle. Do we want any more cards out just yet? Let's stick with these ones just now. Oh, there we are. We have the Five of Swords at the bottom of the deck. Now we have some sticky energy here. And interestingly, I think the fact that we go from the Five of Swords to the 10 shows how quickly this leap happens during Cancer season. I like the Five of Swords being here on account of the fact that we have a Mercury retrograde going on, and this will be in addition to Neptune going retrograde and also Pluto, who is retrograde too, where we have an opportunity to go back and test whether our thinking is actually on point. Mercury is governing the mind, it's governing communication, it's governing logic and reason and rationality. So where the Five of Swords shows up, we've got an opportunity to test whether we've actually been moving in that direction or not. And we have the other retrograde planets also pulling at various points of our own natal charts, showing us where perhaps the consideration of these things might be going on. But a leap from the 5, which is inherently chaotic, to an experience of the 10 doesn't sound like a particularly peaceful transition to me in terms of how our minds are working about things. We're certainly missing out the 6, 7, 8 and 9 of swords, which in their own way create a stepped progression to the limits of our cognition, which is how I see the 10 of Swords. Right? Well, the 10 of Swords is, I can't keep thinking about X in the same way that I have, because I'm recognizing now that I'm damaging myself, or I'm limiting myself, or any of these things that I might have believed about myself are untrue, and so now I have to quite literally acknowledge the limits of reality as I have seen them, and allow myself to change. What do we have off the back of the 10 of Swords? We usually have the Ace. We've got a whole new way of seeing anything. But the stepped progression from 5 to 10, following the usual, intermittent cards. Is it intermittent? No, the word that I want there. Well, the intervening cards means that is a slow increase in pressure that leads to that breakthrough moment, because 10s represent an end, right? To leap from the 5 to the 10 feels more like shock. It feels more like, well, fuck. That didn't go the way that I was expecting it to. Well, fuck. Everything about everything has now changed in front of me. And I've got a very small window to try and adapt my thinking to what has just either been revealed, or what is being shown, or what I have finally understood about a situation. Now, like I said, we could see this going either way, and I could see how the 10 of Swords would be operative in both the more negative experience of whatever comes out this month, but how it could also be a really important part of the Fool and the Four of Wands at the same time, where we recognise that actually we've had a fairly limited, very restricted view of what the world could be, and now it's opening up. And we're letting that happen with the Four of Wands as well. That's potential that I see here. But let's get some clarifiers out on these sets of cards here and see what we have to say. Tell me about the Fool, please. So, ooh, interesting. We have the Empress on her side. We have the Three of Cups in the upright. And we have the Five of Swords in the reverse. Tell me about the Four of Wands, please. Fuck, just bent that card. That's needed. Tell me about the Four of Wands. We've got the Six of Pentacles. And we have the Six of Wands. Tell me about the Ten of Swords, please. We have the King of Wands and the Chariot, with the Queen of Cups at the bottom of the deck. The Queen of Cups represents the sign of Cancer. And obviously that's where the sun's going to be right now. It's also where Mercury is going to be. So we can expect there to be fairly deep and, to some extent, kind of complex feelings about what is showing up during this season that are going to require quite a bit of processing. Why do I say that? Because I think the queens are the internal subjective experience of, in this case, water. And they help us understand how we feel about things before we take action on them. And you will notice that there are some cards here that are kind of speaking to action, or at the very least activity, in so much as the Six of Wands, Six of Wands, Seven, the Chariot, and the King of Wands here showing up under these. But the Empress is on her side. And I don't really know how I feel about that, except that I don't feel terribly comfortable about it. You know, the Empress is a generative energy, and she is the archetypal mother as well, right? So we've got this sense of something being gestated. And perhaps in the case of the Empress being upright, we might have had a little more warning about what is being gestated. You'll notice this coming out underneath the Fool, which is this new cycle starting. But one of the things about the Empress being depicted as pregnant quite often is this idea that there is a period of time where something is gestating, and we are aware, hopefully, that there are changes happening, and this is bringing about something new. The fact that she's on her side gives this a sort of slightly ambush quality to it. I remember there was a friend of my mum's. I was talking to her when I was about 12, and she had no idea she was pregnant. She gave birth in a toilet because she didn't realise that she was pregnant. Having been pregnant a number of times, I don't know how anybody could not notice that, but apparently she didn't. And it's that same thing. It's like, rather than this stepped slow progression, and even we might say in that same way here, betwixt Five of Swords and Ten of Swords, that slow step progression between, you know, the inception of something versus its presentation out into the world, giving birth, right? Where we don't have that intervening period, there is not an opportunity to adjust ourselves at a more natural pace to the changes that are showing up. And I think that part of that jump from the 5 to the 10 is the suddenness with which everything changes in Cancer season. Now, I said before, you know, that June, I hope that you enjoyed June as it was, for being a relative lull in proceedings. It was never a kind of dying off of the intensity of the energy, by no means, because we don't see that in 2026. What we see is, you know, the energy going up in intensity and then plateauing for a little bit and then cranking back up again. There's no kind of peaks and troughs here. It's just like... And June was probably the last point in 2026 where we have that plateau energy that gives us an opportunity to process before everything starts to go very, very funky again. And it seems like June is, Cancer season as a whole is where we start to see perhaps what was seeded back as far as the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and all those planets in Aries that we saw in April, or even, you know, that eclipse in Aquarius earlier still, 17th of February, I think it was, where we start to see what was seeded there actually starting to appear in reality in a way that we can see it, that we can't really escape from. Now, I don't know if you would want to escape from it exactly, right? But there is a kind of shocking angle to all of this that feels like it's going to take quite a bit of processing before we can get our head around it in any kind of meaningful way. You'll notice here that we've got the Three of Cups and the Five of Swords together, and I do think that, you know, rather than it being a relatively solo, how do we work out, you know, how we feel about all of this, that to some extent we may well be leaning on the emotional support of others. You know, back when times were simpler, back in the, well, let's say the 90s, right, where life was just kind of linear and normal, whatever that means, right? And there would be some big hit TV show on the TV, and there was a proper, what we called a water cooler moment, right, where you would have watched it the night before, and everybody's like, God, can you believe what happened in, I don't know if it was a soap like Coronation Street or something like that, if you were from the UK. But then later on in things like, I don't know, these American shows that came through like 24 and stuff like that, where people would quite literally, you know, small talk about, you know, what a shock that was, you know, the plot development in whatever series it was. You know, you would talk to people about that sort of stuff. You know, latterly things like Game of Thrones and shit like that, right? For the people who hadn't read the books and so didn't know what was going on. It feels like there is a lot of that kind of energy. Now, if you think about the sun being in Cancer and how Cancer is kind of a fierce and protective and almost to an extent sort of guarded around what is feeling meaningful, you can see how people might actually during this season really kind of lock into those relationships that help us make sense of the world. A lot more strongly than perhaps they have done for the rest of this year. It's like the mutual support, the mutual aid, whether it's quite literal, and I hope that it doesn't have to be a literal thing, or whether it is emotional. We've got a lot of discussion going on where people are trying to find a way to make sense of things, right, with people that they trust, because this does feel shocking to me. So if the Five of Swords is about stabilising our mental processes, and we're seeing that here, what we've got is, whether or not it's a water cooler moment or not, we've got this kind of, how do we make sense of the world as it is right now off the back of the revelations that have come out during this season, or the things that have changed during this season? How do we make sense of it? And that Cancerian urge to gather up and protect, to almost like bunker down a little bit with meaningful people, feels like it's going to be defining part of this season altogether. Now, what's interesting about that is that it can give the Four of Wands a slightly different interpretation in terms of what we saw initially when it first came out. I mean, yes, we have got the establishment of a new world, or the revelation of an establishment of a new order of doing things. But is the true benefit of this moment, of this season, actually the way that people come together to try and make sense of everything that has happened? Is that in fact how the new foundation is created? It's entirely possible. I mean, I'm not going to lean too hard on that as an interpretation, but I just want to give you an idea that that could be the way that it shows out, rather than everyone going, oh, well, the changes that the ruling elites have brought in are absolutely magnificent and I'm totally behind these. It could be actually a return to something more meaningful and more real in terms of the people who are around us and how we can lift each other up during times of crisis or great change and instability. Because that Six of Pentacles and Six of Wands there are fascinating. In fact, you know, I said I don't want to lean into that too much, but I feel like the internal tuning fork is ringing quite hard. And so actually I think it probably is a little more like that, because the balancing force of the Six of Pentacles, showing us either where balance is required or as a statement of balance being present, is supported by this Six of Wands that has this kind of, we're doing well, this kind of feeling of victory about it. Everything might be going to shit outside of us. There may be things that have been brought in that we don't understand, and we certainly don't fucking like them very much. But we've gained something in the shared experience of helping each other balance each other out on this front. You see what I mean? It's like the more I talk, the more I find it difficult to find anyone in support of what changes suddenly during this period. But there's something collectively experienced that is very rich, that seems to come as a result of the way that we've been kind of ambushed by things. Let's get the... Do you know, actually, I don't want to use the John Barau. I want to use the Deviant Moon, which is an interesting choice in and of itself. That's just waving at me from the corner, right? So we've got the Devil as I split the deck. Just want to say, this is quite literally the best Devil of any deck I own. It's absolutely fantastic. I love it. Right, let's have a look about this Four of Wands. What do we need to know about the Four of Wands, please? There we go. So we have the Moon. And we have the Three of Swords. And we have the Tower at the bottom of the deck. Okay. Well, look at this. Look at this now. We have the Moon, we have the Three of Swords, and we have the Four of Wands together, right? So we're doubling down on this message of there being a foundation. Now, the Four of Wands is often a card of celebration. Now, sometimes we see this indicating marriage, right? It's the union of people coming together. When you think about a marriage itself, right, we haven't got just two people coming together in a marriage. In you know, the best expression of it, we actually have two whole families coming together now, related legally, if not by blood, until one assumes, you know, the arrival of a child, and then everybody is kind of bonded by blood together. It's usually a cause for celebration. But these cards coming out here have really confirmed the way that I feel this month playing out, which is the way in which people come together in the face of something that is truly shocking and paradigm shifting, for sure, where potentially a lot of confusion still exists around, you know, the very nature of it having happened in the first place, and that would be the Moon showing up there. But this sense of a new dawning reality that sees people coming together to support each other in the face of it. Now, Cancer season spreads from, what is it, the 21st, so it's the equinox, the solstice, beg your pardon, summer solstice, right through to the, I think, 23rd, I want to say 23rd, or around about then, right, 23rd of July, or thereabouts. So we've got a span of 4 weeks, and as we know, a lot of things can change during that time. And we have quite a few things that are happening in the intervening period as well. And what I'm seeing here is very much in alignment with Mercury retrograde in Cancer, where we've got that kind of retreating to what is familiar, known, precious ours, and finding relief, succor, and support, reassurance within those home spaces of which Cancer is so fiercely defensive, right? We're leaning on each other. I don't feel like whatever happens here is good, but I feel like the response to it is something really, really powerful. It feels unifying in a way that very little that has happened over the last few years has unified. Now, when you've got the Tower showing up here, Tower is a change of direction, and I always say about the Tower that it is actually uniformly good. It doesn't mean the experience of the Tower in the moment as it occurs feels good. Very rarely does it do, though. But what springs from it generally is good. Now, the Fool, the Tower, the Empress on her side, the Five of Swords, the Ten of Swords, these are giving me kind of like the ick about what may be the catalyst for that. And I'm not going to hypothesize on it. I'm just going to read the energies, right? But the result of it seems powerful, seems transformative, and seems incredibly supportive in the best way possible as people adapt to make sense of the changing paradigm. Now, whether or not this rustles up revolutions, when people unify against something that they don't want to see come in, that's possible. But there's a real sense of belonging in such a Cancerian way, because the emotions seem to be hitting everybody in the same way, if I can put it like that. So you look at a stranger in the street and you know that they're feeling the same way that you are. There's something transcendent about this, because it unifies beyond the arbitrary ways in which we've recognized the division up until this point. Now, if you consider the ways in which we have been divided up until this point, and how it seems almost impossible to overcome in some ways as we're looking around out here, it gives you a sense of the enormity of the things that may shift during this time. For that to be what's happening downstream of it. And there are a few different things that could cause that kind of reaction. They are outside of the scope for me to even hypothesize on. Like I said, I'm just reading the weather that's coming downstream, and there is something unifying about this, something that's bringing people together. And it could well be that the people that we have seen being in training as the teachers and the leaders and the guides, and I've been shitting on about this for like 3 years now, may actually see themselves stepping into that position, not because they decided that they were going to be a leader, but because who they are is exactly what this situation needs to bring a state of balance to people who are feeling imbalanced at this time. Do you see what I mean? That 6 of Wands there is Jupiter and Leo, actually, which is the transit that we will have happening during this time. It is associated with leaders, but the kind of leaders that we need, not the kind of leaders that we've had. What cake? This is my cake. My cat, who is called Cake. I don't know where he is, but he's just yelled at me. Anyway. There's something very crisp about the cards that are on the table. And the crispness we see in the Five of Swords, we see it in the Ten of Swords, we see it in the Tower, we see it in the Three of Swords. These feel uncomfortable. But there is a corresponding union, there is a corresponding coming together that seems to soften the blow. But now here everybody's dealing with the truth, even if it is confusing and illusory at this point, and they're coming together off the face of it. Cake, you need to go away, please. Stop shouting at me. So, when we come to the Ten of Swords, we have this recognition of everything that has changed. And like I said, it's kind of slow coming because the Ten of Swords is best placed when the Ace of Swords shows up with it. There's a transition that is relatively quick when we see the Ace of Swords show up as well, right? It's like, well, end and now we have a whole new way of seeing everything. The fact that we're kind of lingering on the Ten of Swords without that corresponding ace showing up yet feels like there isn't necessarily an acceptance of the limits of our cognition. There isn't necessarily an acceptance of, okay, well, this is just the way that the world works now. And we see this in the Chariot and the King of Wands, both of which are cards that represent energy that is moving. The Chariot is, it's a card of the self primarily. It's about self-discipline and self-motivation and self-awareness. Right? If you can tack self onto the beginning of a word, if you prefix it with self, then it becomes the dominion of the Chariot. But the Chariot is about forward motion, and the Chariot is about determination and willpower, and it comes to mean success because of the aligned determination that is sitting behind the desire to reach the end point, wherever the end point is. And it's here with the King of Wands, which is saying it's time for action. We are aligned, we're balanced, individually, but also, I would say, to an extent, collectively too, in our recognition that now is a moment that requires some kind of action. Now, like I said, it could very much just be on the reassuring and supporting and looking after each other at this point, but it feels a little bit spicier than that. Whilst all that may be going on, other things are going on too. Let's pick these up because I said let's just leave these cards here for now, but I actually want to see what else we need to know about how this season shows up. Let's go 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1. Fucking hell, that was hard work. Right, let's have a look. 3 of Cups, Queen of Pentacles, 5 of Wands, high, with the 2 of Swords at the bottom of the deck. Now, the 2 of Swords is what we don't know that we don't know. Occasionally, it's what we do know that we do know and we don't want to acknowledge, right? We can't, we won't, we don't. What's sitting behind there? Chariot. Yeah, this feels like a pursuit of information. It's like, well, we didn't know this, so what else didn't we know, right? The motivated and aligned energy of the Chariot behind it, like ready for success, because now we are literally barreling towards what we didn't know and we want answers. Because collectively we understand the value of the answers. Like this 5 of Wands here it's very sticky. It's a card of conflict, and I don't feel, not with the 3 of Cups showing up, that this is individual conflict. Like we saw how people are trying to make sense of things down here, and they're choosing to club together, very Cancerian, support each other during this time. But there feels like there's an organisation of a resistance to whatever this is, and that would be the 5 of Wands right there. It's a resistance to what has just been dumped on us and said, there you go, that's your lot. Your paradigm has changed. It feels like collectively everyone's going, no, we're not doing that. Why? Because we understand the value of what we may have just realised that we've lost for some right, and we want it back. That's how this feels here to me. And like I said, this pursuit of more of the information of what has been hidden or obscured, or what we didn't know that we didn't know, or what we did know that we didn't know. Like, it feels like there's a cranking in intensity during this time. And that kind of makes sense with what we see going on astrologically. We've got a whole heap of shit happening in Leo from July onwards, well, 30th of June onwards. So we've got Jupiter going into Leo, we've got the South Node going into Leo, we've got solar eclipses happening in Leo, and all of it is opposed by Pluto on the other side in Aquarius. Now, this is going to make everything feel very loud, I think. It's going to give everything a very loud quality to it. But if you recall, over the last 6 months or so, I've been saying it's getting easier and easier to see who your people are, right? To identify your tribe, to work out the people who are, which level people are operating at. That same message has been coming out again and again and again. And I don't know if it was in the monthlies, or actually this might have been coming out in the weekly energy readings. It's been coming out for a while. And here we are arriving at a point in time where now those relationships become even more important than they have been up until this point. There's the ruling planet of Cancer is the moon, or the ruling body of Cancer is the moon. But that can also represent the masses, right? The subjective emotional well-being of the masses. And where I'm seeing this, people coming together to support each other, Three of Cups twice, because of an understanding of what is valuable that they're now willing to fight for. It feels like Cancer season is a tremendous turning point. And maybe the reason why it's been getting easier and easier to find our people is now because at this point where we need to lock down on those relationships and mutually support in those, to resist or to be in conflict with what we don't want. It feels like a synthesis point. Tell me about this Five of Wands, please. Yeah, Four of Cups. Queen of Cups, Knight of Pentacles. And the Seven of Swords. Which is that fascinating sword of Damocles, right? But not in the traditional sense that you would expect a sword of Damocles, which is, goes back to the old myth of the sword being suspended by a single human hair, right? Which could drop at any time. And so when the sword of Damocles is active as a concept in one's life, we feel like at any moment something might happen, right? What we've got here is effectively a sword of Damocles, but what is supported by our legs, our own endurance above. And as soon as our legs go, that's when we skewer ourselves. It's the I have opinions, and some of those opinions are not popular. But maybe let's talk about the big buildings that are going up all over the world that are housing lots of technology that we end up paying for somehow. There's a feeling of like, the turkeys voting for Christmas, or the accepting to pay for the things that will ultimately enslave you or spear you right through the throat. Like, whether or not this season relates to something like that, or whether there are a number of things coming together, there's a sense that the only thing that's stopping the sword going through our throat and us reaching a point of no return is our own endurance, is the strength of our own legs in a given situation. So if we're ready to fight collectively together about something, in rejection of something that we don't want, and instead putting our effort into creating something that is better for all of us, then this is the point where it happens. This idea of Barau's basket and the things that it may represent. Like, I can't remember exactly what it was that Barau said. It was something like a reset, a surprising new upswing for humanity, something like that, right? Which everyone's gone, oh, wonderful, right? We're all going to live together in some sort of, communist utopia where communism is actually done properly this time. /S, massive sarcasm there, right? Well, the reality of it may be actually that we're sitting on the wrong side of the fence to get the benefit from that. And in fact, that utopian vision is actually for, you know, members of the big club that you're not a part of. And the rest of us have to make do. But there are considerably more of us than there are of them. And so we have to realise the importance of our own endurance. We have to recognise the importance of our own willingness to move outside of the standard parameters within which we operate, and to do it collectively in a way that matters, because we're fighting for something that really matters. This is an extraordinary season. It's an extraordinary period of time, which is just building layer on layer on the extraordinary periods of time that we have been experiencing with far too much frequency over the course of 2026. Like I said, the majority of June has been somewhat of a lull in proceedings, but it's been a plateau. And as we move into Cancer season, this is going to crank up, I think, to a level we haven't actually experienced yet. Cancer is cardinal water, and so there is a kind of like peak experience of emotion whenever Cancer shows up, because we're pushing in a direction now. This is what cardinal signs do. They initiate in a direction. What are you willing to work for? What are you willing to work to prevent? Are you willing to come together with your fellow man, with whom you may have had all sorts of beef recently, because everybody's at each other's throats, and recognise the humanity in the other person? Come together enough to support mutually and fight mutually, resist mutually. I feel like this is the essence of Cancer season right here, and I am absolutely beyond intrigued to see how this is showing up for all of the individual signs. But I think we may well be seeing repetitions of the same kind of motifs coming out in the individual signs readings, because you know, we have an individual purpose, but we also have a collective job to do. And I think more than anything else, that's what this is pointing to. The disruptive energy of 2026 did not end when that 7-planet stellium in Aries dispersed. That was the seed point. But I think what we're starting to see here is the emergence of the whatever it was that was planted here. It's breaking ground, and now nobody can pretend that they can't see it anymore. Wow. How interesting, right? I'm going to leave it there. Know that I love you all very, very much, and I'll see you soon.